the State Systems Specialist Network. It's a service of the Office of Child Care State Technical Assistance Network. Welcome to the Kansas Early Childhood Forum. I have straight up 10 o'clock, so I think we will get started. We're going to do some more introductions here in a minute, but right now I'm going to ask Mary Hess to give us just a brief introduction to the technology that we're going to use for our webinar this morning, to the Go-To webinar. Many of you have participated in our virtual forums in the past, so you're familiar with this technology, and some may be joining this call for the first time. So we're going to ask Mary to walk us through some of the features of Go-To webinar. Mary?
Thanks, Ray. So today, I know many of you have used Go-To webinar in the past. We are utilizing some new technology with Go-To webinar to be able to provide better broadcasts back to you. So one way we're doing this is doing the integrated audio. So you'll notice on your side panel, on your control panel, you have an audio tab. That gives you the option to use your telephone or to use mic and speakers. And mic and speakers means that the sound's going to come out of your computer speakers. If you are on the telephone today, we do ask that you please check the telephone box or circle, because that way we can unmute you and allow you to speak to other participants. So please, if you are using the telephone today, we ask that you have checked that particular circle, which will allow us to have more control over you sharing with the group through audio. You can also expand and hide your control panel by clicking on the white and orange box with the arrow in it. That way you can see more of your screen during the presentation. In addition, there's a question and chat box at the bottom of your control panel. If you expand that, you're able to communicate with us as organizers and also the presenter to be able to ask questions throughout the meeting. We will be monitoring these questions, and that way we'll be able to read them aloud to everyone in the group. So also this can be used if you're having technology issues and you need to get a hold of us as organizers. Because networking is one of the keys of the Early Childhood Forum, we also have allowed everyone to view the attendee list, and that's on your control panel. So you can click the plus sign, and that will expand your attendee list, and you can read who else is joining us today. We'll also be utilizing polls. So a box similar to this will show up on your screen when we launch those polls, and we ask that you check the appropriate answer and then click submit. And all of that information comes into us as the organizers, and we are able to show you the results of those as we move through the meeting. So our first poll today is, what geographic region of Kansas do you represent? And I'm going to have Christy Kane launch that for us.
Okay, so I am getting ready to launch that, and so you'll have a little bit of time to respond. And then I'll share those results with the audience. It looks like about 3/4 of you have voted, so I'll give you just a couple more seconds. There was a good point brought up that some people are statewide, so that is a great point, that statewide should have been an option on this poll. We did not have a statewide or an other, so very good point. Okay, it looks like most of you have voted, and now I'm going to share those results. And for those of you who aren't able to see the results, there were 52% from Northeast Kansas, 7% from Southeast, 21% from Central, 7% from Northwest, and 12% from Southwest. And then there is one more poll. that, just which goal area you work most closely with. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll as well. It looks like most of you have voted. I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to finish voting if you haven't. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share those results with you. And for those of you who can't see the results, it looks like 5% of you represent health, 14% represent mental health, 40% represent early care and education, 26% parent education and home visiting, and 14% family support. And I did want to mention that today's webinar is part of a Kansas-sponsored series for National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day. In Kansas, through Project Launch, we conduct a week-long webinar series every year to offer free professional development for lots of different topics. And so I hope that you've had an opportunity to take advantage of those. And if not, we will be talking about the last one that's scheduled for tomorrow later on in the session. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Ray.
Okay, thank you. Again, welcome to the Early Childhood Forum. This is the combined meeting of the Kansas Early Childhood Stakeholders Group and the State Child Care Advisory Committee. Today, we're going to hear legislative updates from Doug Bowman, who's joining us here in just a minute. And then we're going to have a presentation from Neal Sharma, who's a board member of the Alliance for Children's Education. And he's going to be speaking with us about building partnerships with our business community to help strengthen early childhood efforts at the community level. And then we set aside some time to hear from our state agency leadership. So we'll have updates from state agencies. Some of our partners were not able to join us today, so they have posted their reports online at the KECCS website. So we'll make sure and note that during the presentations. And then Loretta is going to review some of the feedback from the forum, the Early Childhood Forum, where we talked about recommendations regarding the forum and how to sort of make improvements and change the forums. And then we'll do a wrap-up and just review plans for the next forums. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Doug to let us know what's happening at the legislature. Doug.
Thank you, Ray. I'm going to go forward on the assumption that you can hear me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Doug Bowman, and I serve as staff to the Kansas Coordinating Council on Early Childhood Developmental Services. And in that capacity, I spend more time than anyone should ever admit to walking the halls of the Capitol, and I'm happy to share what little I know. So let's start by announcing, for those of you who didn't notice the headlines, that the circus has come back to town. They returned yesterday. Their goal is to try to finish their business and get out of here in a fairly short session of 80 days. Speculation is that might be a challenging task. They did announce yesterday that they're not planning on having sessions this weekend, Saturday or Sunday. It is Mother's Day, by the way. And so that looks like it's very highly likely that they'll be here with us next week, and who knows how far beyond that. They have a list of things they want to try to accomplish in the final days of the 2013 legislative session. And once again, my opinion is that the linchpin, the thing that is kind of the centerpiece that they're all waiting for a decision on, is the tax issue. Real quick background, few years ago in the heart of the recession. They passed a slight increase to the statewide sales tax, taking that sales tax rate to 6.3%. At the time they did that, it was advertised as a temporary measure to get them through the recession with a sunset date of July 1 this year, 2013. Since that time, other things have happened, and the governor is proposing and he is supporting an extension of that sales tax bump, leaving it at 6.3%. The Senate is in agreement with him, but the House has taken a position that they want to adhere to the original position of letting that extension lapse on July 1st, taking it back down to 5.7%. And this decision, I think, is the centerpiece. When they make a decision and it's final as to whether they leave it at 6.3, take it back to 5.7, somewhere in between, then I think a lot of the other fiscal decisions will fall into place behind such. So they've got a budget. This year their plan is to work one and only one budget bill. So there won't be an omnibus budget bill come along after the fact. This is the one and only budget. That budget is in conference as we speak with the Senate and House conferees discussing point by point what they're going to do. And the Constitution requires that when they leave, when they bang the gavel and go home at the very end, that they have a budget that is expected to be in the black. They cannot submit a deficit budget. So that's why the revenue side of the equation is so critically important. Among the budget things that we're looking at, there's a difference of opinion between the House and the Senate on the Board of Regents budget. And that's a fairly large item and a fairly contentious item. The House is proposing that they cut Regents spending by about 4%. The Senate is saying only about 2% cut. The governor is arguing that they should leave Regents alone. The other budget item I wanted to mention, that one that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, has to do with the Children's Initiative Fund, the monies which originally come from the Master Tobacco Settlement and support many of the early learning programs that are near and dear to our hearts. The Master Tobacco Settlement is never known for certain until sometime in mid-April when we get the final numbers. When those numbers came in this year, they were higher than had been expected and anticipated and budgeted for. And so the governor is proposing in a governor's budget amendment that he submitted a few weeks back, he is suggesting that about $9.5 million of that Master Tobacco Settlement monies be taken back into the state general fund. There are those who disagree with him and think that that's taking money that should be earmarked for monies that should be earmarked for early childhood programs, in keeping with the original legislative language that created the Children's Initiative Fund a long time back. That is a budget issue that will be resolved in conference committee and will get an up or down vote in the House and the Senate before they go home. So there's some excellent materials that have been prepared showing kind of the history and the position on that with Kansas Act for Children. I encourage you to contact me if you need to know how to access that, but there's a lot of good information out there on that issue. Moving away from budget issues into bills, most of the bills that are going to be dealt with this session are done. They've either been passed and signed and moved on, or they've fallen by the wayside. There are a few of them that are still in the mix. Most notably among them is the Read to Succeed language. This was a proposal the governor came forward with early on, and he had suggested that we retain children in third grade if they were not doing well with their reading scores. The bill was worked in the Senate and amended very much so. So the current proposal that they're looking at talks about retaining children in first grade. It has a lot of provisions and exceptions. The House is got to decide whether they're going to go along with the Senate version or if it's going to die and have to be revisited again next year. So I can give you more details if you like, but I think I'm getting short on time. there were other bills that were passed that might have impact upon the families that we care about. There was one having to do with those families that receive public benefits needing to be available for drug testing if there's suspicion that there might be issues there. And then the last two things I want to mention, which are kind of global issues, big picture issues that I would encourage folks to keep an eye on, are the school finance lawsuit, which the Kansas Supreme Court will be hearing probably next fall. That will go a long way towards setting the stage for what happens in the 2014 legislative session, and will have a huge impact upon the Kansas state budget. And finally, I would encourage you to keep your eye on proposals to potentially expand Medicaid eligibility. If you told me 6 months ago that we'd even be talking about this, I would have laughed, but the governor has indicated his willingness to give some consideration to the expansion of eligibility for Medicaid, which is allowed in the Affordable Care Act at the federal level. It's a state-by-state decision, and Kansas has not made a decision yet whether they're going to go that direction or not. So I think I'm running late on time, so I'm going to pause and see if there are questions that people have submitted that you want me to try to address.
There are no questions at this time. Please remember, if you would like to submit questions, you may do so in the question chat box on the bottom of your control panel.
And Doug's contact information is also provided on the screen. Some of you may have it. You can, I'm sure Doug would welcome contacts directly.
Absolutely.
If you have questions or if you need additional information on any of the legislative items that he presented this morning. And thank you again, Doug, for joining us and for always being so informative.
I'm happy to help.
Okay, great. So at this time, I see Neal Sharma is online with us, and so I'd like to introduce Neal as our guest to the forum this morning. And I'm going to turn it over to Neal. I think, Neal, you have a presentation that you're going to be sharing with us. He's got a brief presentation, and then he'd really like this time to be spent in discussion. So we'll be using not only the chat box, but Mary is prepared to unmute your lines if you have questions or even comments, things you'd like to share about what's happening in your community. So Neal, please.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, great. So I think we can change it over maybe to me as the presenter. There we go. Thank you. And I will just jump right in. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the Alliance for Childhood Education. It is something that a group of us have been working pretty hard on. My involvement in the Alliance has been only for the past year or so. And prior to this kind of first year of it getting launched, it was started by Jonathan Friedan and Tyler Notberg, and kind of I guess more of a startup range or method. So a group of us, some of whom had been working in education reform in Kansas and Missouri for a very long time, and then an additional number of CEOs and presidents have gotten involved, largely because it is our collective view that education is the #1 priority for, frankly, the country should be paying attention to. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of why we think so and where that came from. But let me first go a little bit about who the Alliance is. Sorry, there we go. The Alliance is a nonprofit, nonpartisan business leaders committing to improving Kansas and Missouri's education system. So we're focused not only on early childhood education, but all the way through the spectrum. In this kind of first-year plan, most, if not all, of our attention is focused on the early education portions of this. But I actually came at this organization originally from the post-secondary affordability arena. So, but as I have gotten more and more involved, and as a parent, I've been more interested in the early childhood portion and how it impacts my family, not only my business. We have 5 sort of core principles that we care about as we look at solutions to what we perceive as a crisis in education, both globally, nationally, and in Kansas and Missouri. And that is accountability, transparency, a student orientation versus maybe the adults in the system, an orientation more towards the students, measured ROI for the investments that are being made in innovation. And innovation is a really key element in terms of making sure that there are real solutions that are provided in addition to just naming the problem or continually beating the drum about what the problem is. These core principles are our derivation or our kind of piece of another program that was extremely successful in the state of Colorado that the Alliance is very much modeled after, and that's called Colorado Succeeds. For those of you who are familiar with education reform in Colorado, there was a lot of successful outcomes that came out of a business organization that was formed there called Colorado Succeeds. And these core principles, accountability, transparency, student centricity, measured ROI, and innovation, are not unlike the kind of business principles that we care about as business leaders. These are the things that bring efficiencies in the business and bring, more importantly, efficacy in the scope of that business. And to a large extent, we think that those principles are pretty valuable as it relates to the delivery of education as well. I recognize that a lot of that is kind of loaded. There's a lot of loaded implication. I want to be clear about how the Alliance looks at it. We don't look at it with a particular policy angle that we care about. There's a lot of business groups that do. There's a lot of groups that do. And that's not our approach. We want to look at what works, and we want to repeat what works to the extent they can be repeated and applied in as many school districts as possible in the state of Kansas and Missouri. So it's really about offering options, understanding what works, and perpetuating what works. And hopefully through that, improving the process, not only in incremental ways, but maybe sort of more revolutionary ways. A couple key differentiating points about the Alliance that I think is important. Many of us are involved in chambers of commerce. Many of us are involved in the Civic Council, for example, here in Kansas City. And these are organizations that have a wide array of policy issues and policy agendas. And education is certainly one of them. But what is unfortunate about those organizations is that if education is one of them, sort of mixed in there with transportation and mixed in there with healthcare and mixed in there with a number of other economic concerns, tax policy, for example, education, in our view, is not given the attention that it requires and frankly should demand from the business community. And this is actually really what led to me getting involved in the Alliance. And I once saw a presenter who runs a very successful charity to build wells, water wells, freshwater wells for folks in the developing world, so Africa, India, and so forth. And he kept talking about how nothing could happen in these communities unless there was fresh water, because mothers, for example, would walk 4 hours to fetch fresh water, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, or even longer, just to get the fresh water for the day, because that's all they could carry. And then, so as a result, they were not contributing in other ways. There were no other ways for them to really make anything more, because the water search was what the problem was. They talked about girls not being able to be educated or go to school because there were hygienic concerns, or there was all sorts of other things that pretty much predicated on fresh water in those communities. And I really looked at that and said, you know, in the United States, we don't exactly have the problem with fresh water being delivered to our communities. Well, we have a problem, but it makes sense that we have, there is one issue that has primacy over the other issues. And in my view, that issue or that topic is education. And I know I share it with my other Alliance board members. There is no way to solve the education crisis, the energy crisis, the healthcare crisis, the debt crisis without education. There is no way to solve the crisis in employment that business has in order to get a growth in the economy and build a tax base without education. So if you looked at any issue, no matter what it might be, it all is rooted in education. People, kids, children, as well as adults being educated to be able to handle the demands of an ever-increasing globalized environment and an increasingly sophisticated environment, and more importantly, being able to think and innovate solutions to many of the problems that we face. That all starts with education. So in my respect, and something that drives me, is this notion that education is was our water well, is our first and major baseline issue, and everything else drives from that. So that is why I was drawn to the Alliance, because it's only focused on education policy. It is the primary and the only thing that we pay attention to and beat the drum about. We are the only organization, not only exclusively business, but we're in both states. And lastly, something that we've come to learn over the last year, I think, in a way that was unanticipated, there is a lot of consensus around the importance of education in every environment in our state, from the southwestern portion to Wichita to Kansas City. But people attack it differently, certainly, and there's a lot of discussions to be had, and there's often maybe competing interests or different interests. We're looking to be listeners and make sure that if a policy needs to be crafted with the different environments in mind, then it needs to be crafted that way. But we're looking to join or convene all the interests of folks who understand the crisis in education as much as we do and appreciate it as much in the rural environments, the urban environments, and the suburban environments. Often that isn't being done, by the way, in Missouri as well as in Kansas. And so this is something that we really want to make a part of how we approach it. So we're ultimately an advocacy organization when it's all said and done, a policy and advocacy organization. So we kind of look at it with light and heat, and our actions are focused, as it indicates here, in three major areas: to inform, to influence, and to improve. So in a large respect, we think the business community, while interested in education, does not understand many of the things that are happening in Topeka. They don't understand maybe the depth of the crisis or the impending crisis, and they need to, as do their employees and the parents, in order to be activated and help influence change for the better, which is ultimately our goal, is to then improve, and take this kind of common sense approach to how we do our policy making and our legislating around the issues of education. We have a bunch of objectives, obviously, but when it's all said and done, around early childhood, we want to increase the number of children who have the opportunity to participate in early childhood programs. And further, we want to make sure that the programs that are in place are effective and working. And then we want to ensure that, of course, lawmakers understand the primacy of education and put that first and foremost in their minds as well as they do their policy making. Our year one strategy is very specific. I mean, I think we're very much focused on building a dedicated board of business leaders and a dedicated membership of business leaders, so we have some gravity in the conversation, and that's started to take off. Then we want to partner with organizations that have education as at least a component of what they care about, with it being the primary component that we care about. And then certainly the education-focused organizations as well, to make sure that there's coordination, there's a cohesive messaging, and that there's inclusive messaging. And then lastly, we want to educate everyone, ranging from the business leaders to parents to legislators and lawmakers in general. Right now, the two major policy issues that we decided to focus on is one that I heard mentioned when I joined the presentation, which is the Children's Initiative Fund in the state of Kansas, and I think we got an update about what's facing it right now, which is unfortunate, and ECDEC in Missouri, which is another major funding issue in Missouri, where money that was supposed to be committed, not even new money, is being taken away. So I want to briefly go through some of this. I understand that this is probably preaching to the choir, but I don't know if many people sort of get how bad it is in a lot of respects globally. And I served on a board for a major research university in Washington, D.C., and I received some of these stats then too. And it's very sobering to understand how the United States competitiveness will play out, not only because of wage differences, but frankly because of education differences. And the stats are up there on your screen. You can kind of see what's happening globally in terms of our competition with the countries with 1 billion people or more. And by the way, if you look at countries like Pakistan, for example, it will have about 400 million people, which will probably make it the 3rd or 4th most populous country, surpassing the United States. So right now, of course, it's China, India, Indonesia, United States as the top 4. Pakistan will enter that soon and soon surpass the United States. So the sheer number of people that are present is pretty remarkable, and certainly that is what has moved manufacturing jobs overseas. But what we always used to feel good about was say, well, there are manufacturing jobs overseas, that's okay, but they'll never take our engineering because we have such a skilled workforce that they don't have. And as many of you now know, engineering is moving overseas. And then we would say, well, you know, these folks are educated to do very specific jobs and have very specific skills. They may have manufacturing, they may have engineering. They won't ever invent product. And I'll have you know that the focus of post-secondary education in China and India now is increasingly on the American-style liberal arts education that's happening to give a broader set of skills to those students. We will soon see invention move over there as well. That leaves one thing for Americans to do, which is just retail or sell the products that are made somewhere else, engineered somewhere else, and possibly invented somewhere else, and sell them back and forth to each other. So I think it's pretty clear how our competitiveness will be in jeopardy, as well as our standard of living will be in jeopardy if we don't find ways to ensure that all aspects of that chain that I just mentioned stay here in the United States. But we absolutely need an educated workforce to be able to do that. So when you look at that, there's your problem. We have, in large respect, a big chunk of functionally illiterate folks. We have a big chunk of problems where proficiencies in both reading and math of children that are not eligible, that are not ready by the 3rd grade, for example. We have a huge problem as it relates to national security as well, whether it's the obesity epidemic or whether it's the education epidemic. They're not eligible for the armed forces due to their readiness at the point of graduation, of high school graduation, if they graduate from high school. And many of our business leaders share this notion that we don't believe we're going to have educated and skilled workforce. You know, there's something like 76 million baby boomers that are going to hit retirement age, the youngest of the baby boomers, by 2018. So it's 76 million that will retire, and only 51 million that are entering the workforce behind them. So millennials or the generations behind. So in a very short amount of time, we're going to have about a 25 million person gap in terms of what the workforce had in terms of employed folks and what the workforce will be able to supply. And while we may work efficiently, more efficiently 5 years from now, we're not going to be able to close a 25 million person gap by just efficiencies. We're going to have to ensure that there are skilled workers that are entering the workforce that we can employ, and that we don't exacerbate the problem. In Kansas, as you heard about the Children's Initiative Fund, and you heard a little bit about the law that suggests that the tobacco settlement surplus would be moved not to the general fund but to the SIF endowment. And every year, or at least this year as well, there's another proposal to move that money. And not to SIF, but just to move that money. And so the hope is that there would be an endowment that's created. It's looking tenuous, I think, at the moment in the legislature. But that's a very key example of how education is not, the primacy of education is not, I think, well appreciated by the legislature as a whole or the administration as a whole, despite maybe many of the comments to the contrary. So that's one of the major focuses that we have here. I want to talk a little bit also about how business leaders look at early childhood education, not just 15 years from now or 13 years from now or 12 years from now when these students graduate from high school or college and enter the workforce. For a company like mine, a technology company like mine, it is a ready and real problem now. The way I try to describe it is in Kansas, and in Kansas City in particular, we don't have mountains, and we don't have beaches, and we don't have winning sports teams. And so we still have to, and we don't have necessarily a workforce that is skilled in the technical areas. I run an internet consultancy, a digital consultancy, in the technical areas that we need. How do we recruit people to come to Kansas if we don't have those things to offer them? And the answer to that question is we recruit them by talking about the standard of living and the excellent schools, and the idea that that builds a wonderful place to raise a family. So it is a very real problem now if that is not an argument that I can make. It will be much harder for me to recruit staff to Kansas if they have to look at putting their students in, their kids in private schools, because that option is available to them in Baltimore, suburban Baltimore, or in suburban Chicago, or in suburban, San Francisco, for example. If I can't offer that a public school system that can educate their kids, their children excellently, and ensure the results that they're looking for, and build a standard of living that comes from a wonderful education, whether it be the homes that are built, the neighborhoods that are built, and the kind of safety environment that exists. If I can't offer all of that, that's kind of underpinned by education, I'm going to have a really hard time finding other things to recruit people to the state of Kansas. So this is a really real issue right now, not just what might happen in 2018, not just what might happen when, if we don't have an educated workforce that enters the workforce in 15 years or 13 years. Again, this is probably preaching to the choir. There are empirical data to suggest that the ROI on investing in preparedness for school in the early childhood environment pays off. And it pays off not only in the student themselves and their readiness, but it pays off for the local area and the generation of activity in that local area for every dollar that's invested. And the human capital part is almost impossible to measure, but the financial impact in a very real and immediate term is. And in both cases, an investment in early childhood education seems like a good deal. I think, and this is another great example over the sort of lifetime, sort of where the savings are for kids in that point in their lives where their brains are expanding. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I can tell you it is extremely evident every single day to watch their young minds expanding and what they're taking in. And at that very influential period from 2 to 5-ish where their brains are truly sponges and growing physiologically at such an amazing rate, what that means is that's set up the right trajectory for the rest of their lives and what it saves society as a result. And essentially, that animation would suggest that the net benefit is $245,000 net benefit per child for the investment that's made, which is quite remarkable for the cost of the investment. And when we make this presentation typically to business leaders, this slide is what we present, and then I bring up that recruitment point almost every time. It kind of is a common sense argument to suggest preparing kids for school and preparing them early to succeed at school, especially at that critical time of their development. It just seems like it's a common sense argument to make, but it's amazing sometimes where you almost have to point out the common sense for people to really recognize it. You have to say things like, literally, as you know, what starts well has a tendency to end well, and what starts toxic, and there's this notion about toxic stress that has been very intriguing to me over the course that I've been involved in the Alliance, what starts early that way, that kind of toxic environment, often does not end well. And there's a huge societal cost to that as well. But you sometimes have to make that point in a common sense way, because it's not, maybe it's viscerally felt, but it's not articulated very well. And then never mind what it means for the workforce that folks like us are looking to hire now and in the future. And again, no matter what, there are definitely studies out there that suggest that the outcomes are marginal later on, and folks start to regress to the mean later on. Kids start to regress to the mean later on in their education process. And there are many, many studies to suggest that, in fact, that the early childhood education is a highly impactful and effective thing. At some point, you could probably have a study suggest anything you wanted to suggest, but I think from our point of view, when you have enough empirical data to confirm what seems to be instinctual common sense, that's probably the best idea. And not only that, there's relatively little harm in attempting to prioritize preparing our children to be successful for the rest of their schooling as they navigate the educational system in their K-12 and their K-20 environment. And essentially, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce agrees with us as well, which is all that really says here. So this is actually the point where I really love to turn it over. I think the method that Christy and Mary would prefer is the hand-raising elements that are at the on your go-to meeting. I'm sure you probably have all done this well. I've mentioned to Christy and Mary that your use of technology for these webinars are fantastic, and so hopefully you're all able to do that. Here's the part that I really would love to hear from you. One of the things that Christy and Mary and team asked us to discuss was how you can partner with business and how you can build those partnerships with business. And what I'd like to, and I want to give you a couple ideas to think about here. The first thing I think is that's really important is to identify champions of early education that are in the business community. In many of these communities, having grown up in a town in southwestern Kansas myself, this is not a very difficult thing to do. The business leaders are often in the forefront of the community in many civic ways as well, and they're parents. And so finding those champions and making sure they're galvanized around what is the impending crisis, not only impending, I suppose, but what is the now crisis as well, I think is perhaps the most important thing that you could do. And from our perspective, what we would ask is, to the degree that as you identify these business leaders, that you send them our way, because we're really looking to build the organization around folks across the state that at whatever their level of time or interest it might be, but at least we can have them organized and informed on a continual basis so that they can hopefully help influence change. But I think the identification process is really important. There's an eagerness there, there's an enthusiasm there, and they may not be as well informed as maybe they would like to be, and so taking the opportunity to just at least identify them and begin the informational process, I think is really critical. Second, I think, in terms of involving business, is to give them opportunities to make a difference in your environments. I think we all have different measures of time and talent and treasure to share to causes that matter to us. So your ask typically of these business leaders may not be their money, or if you're an organization, for example, that is raising money, or it may just be money because their best method of engaging with you is to write a check and not to spend time. But almost every business leader that I've met and know personally or professionally has some calculus, some degree of time, treasure, and talent to convey. Some are maybe not terribly articulate or terribly willing to stand up and make a case for you, so you're not going to really ask for their talents there, but they may be really good in operationalizing elements or building a case or measuring a case or being analytical about what you're dealing with. Obviously, raising funds is an important element of most not-for-profit organizations in order for them to succeed, and they're most people, not only business leaders, but most people like to put their money where they can see an immediate impact, where they can see a real tangible impact. There's not that same degree of satisfaction when they are writing a check into kind of the great, big hole, black hole, for example. And then the last is time. There is some time that they can spend with children, with the students, whether they have kids of that age or not, and start to see the kinds of things that are working really well. And the final point that I would point out is there's no reason to hide maybe the things that aren't working so well. Fundamentally, business leaders are problem solvers. That is how they look at their business as oftentimes what they're called on to do the entire day. There's not a huge risk in saying these are the things that we haven't got quite right that we want to find a way to get quite right. That's a little bit different than the typical pitch that's made to me, for example. The typical pitch that's made to me is, hey, we have this initiative we'd really like to go after, and it's a hopeful pitch and it's a positive pitch. But there is a lot of hope and positivity in solving problems and being head-on and transparent about how are we going to get this right, and we need your help to get this right, whether it is your time, your talent, or your treasure. So hopefully those are some, I guess, some areas where you can think about it. What I've been amazed by, and what has been really, frankly, frustrating, is the idea that these very common sense, like hit-you-in-the-face points that have been substantiated empirically and are kind of obvious, in my view, anecdotally, are not swaying the priorities of our legislature or our administration. And we make all these rational arguments, and every stat that I've made before, rational arguments, substantiated arguments, empirical arguments, yet for whatever reason, there isn't enough to sway the legislature to not threaten $9.5 million of SIF funding. And to be honest with you, I don't get it, and I'm not quite sure what it takes. I know there are definitely some things that we can do, and definitely some things that are in our roadmap through our advocacy efforts and our policy changing efforts and our efforts with political funds as well down the road. But ultimately, it comes down to votes, and it comes down to parents. So I guess my question is, I've just kind of thrown it up on the board here. In your view, and what you have found, what is it that finally resonates, that finally gets someone to change their mind, change their vote in the legislature, change their opinion, or change their priorities? What have you found that you can do that allows parents to understand that, yes, their school is fantastic, but it could be made even better, or that the preschool is fantastic and it can be made even better? And what have you found that really ties together rural and urban points of view to build consensus rather than sometimes the tension that we have here in the state of Kansas? And lastly, when you know the business leaders that you know, what do you think they need in order for them to be successful in their advocacy efforts? So these are, I guess, the questions I'm posing out to you. I think the method that they're, like I mentioned earlier, that they're looking for you to follow is the hand-raising method. It should be up on the right side of your screen. But I would love to hear your thoughts on how we actually take this perhaps obvious, but at least empirical or well-substantiated point, and how do we activate our energy for this issue to actually affect change? What has worked and what hasn't worked?
Okay, thank you so much, Neal. I am looking for people who are raising their hand, and I can unmute you so you can join in the discussion. And I see we have quite a few responses that have been typed into the question box. And
oh, okay.
We'll share those with you. I just wanted to see if anyone would like to speak verbally. And Shanna, not to put you on the spot, but you had typed some things into the question box. I'm going to try to unmute you. I don't know. I know that you are on mic, and so I'm not sure if you have a mic available or not. So are you there, Shanna? I'll give you one more shot. Hopefully you have a mic. Okay. Who else would like to say something? Vicki, I might unmute you and see. Okay. Yeah, are you there, Vicki?
Yeah. This is Vicki Roper, and I'm with the Kansas Children's Service League, and had the opportunity this legislative session to present to one of the House committees on children and seniors, I think. And the ACEs information really seemed to resonate there. I think we had a lot of bipartisan support and a lot of positive response. And as far as what can help with the advocacy message, I really think parent leadership is really important. I think the parents are more effective than staff, and that grassroots advocacy piece is critical. And I think that we have a sheet that we've used in Sedgwick County with the Early Childhood Coordinating Council that kind of shows when parents are ready for those kinds of roles and responsibilities. So as professionals, we're not exploiting them or kind of rushing that. And, you know, I can send that out. It was produced at the national level through Circle of Parents. And I think there is sort of a parent leadership ladder that we can move, you know, parents through that helps with grassroots advocacy.
I think that's a fantastic point, Vicki, and I actually I couldn't agree more on your point about the engagement of parents. So in my neighborhood, for example, you know, you can talk about education or education reform or the priority of education, and there's a general, I think, I don't know, complacency perhaps that says, you know, I grew up around here and I did well and I'm fine, and you know, so really my kids are going to be fine too at a great school, and you know, it'll be okay and they'll find a way, and you don't want to kind of beat them over the head with bad news, but you really want to raise their level of concern a little bit more, just to get at least a little bit more engagement from them. And you're right. I mean, I think it's going to take parents who are voters to come off the sidelines as much, understand that there is either a problem or a crisis, or more importantly, there's so many opportunities to make it better. And what's so interesting about that for me, if I were a legislator is, as a business leader or as a parent, I have no other agenda except to improve education in the state of Kansas. There's no other reason. I don't have any, there's nothing hidden, there's nothing, you know, calculated about it. The only real motivation is to make it better, make it that much better for my children and the children of my neighbors. And so I could not agree with you more. I mean, this is the purest request that you could ever ask for, is from a people, a constituency that cares for nothing more except to try to improve it the best they can.
Am I still unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question about, I was on a call yesterday with Ready Nation.
Yeah.
And they used to be with Pew Charitable Trust, and now they're with America's Promise. And
yeah,
it's a small unit of 4 people, and they talked about kind of organizing at the national level. And are we connected? Are you connected to that whole effort?
we are. In fact, Jonathan, who is our co-chairman, I think is a signatory to Ready Nation's last letter that they circulated. And then our organization, Tori, their executive director, interacts with, like you mentioned, it's kind of a smaller staff there, interacts with a couple members of that staff on a fairly regular basis. And in addition, there's another group called America's Edge, which is also a national organization in Washington, slightly larger staff, and they also are, they're trying to do it more quantitatively, but they also are trying to organize around essentially global competitiveness issues and how they relate to education, in particular early childhood education. So yes, we're connected on a national level. And finally, you know, the Colorado Succeeds program was very successful, as I mentioned, in Colorado, and they're looking to take that model, and there's an organization now that's been formed out of that called America Succeeds. And we are in direct contact with the leadership there, meaning they're kind of helping us as we kind of get off the ground here in terms of framing up how our organization could be more effective.
Yay.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Okay, Neal, we have had quite a few other questions come in, and I'm going to give it a shot to unmute. Shanna and Rich are in the same office, so let's see if Shanna and Rich, are you on? Hello? They should be unmuted. Are you there? Okay. We will share their comments verbally. I thought I heard something. Is that you, Shanna or Rich? Okay. We're not able to get their technology to work, so we'll share their comments verbally. And I'm scanning to see if anyone else has their hand up. So, Mary, would you like to go ahead and share some of the questions and comments that have come in?
Yes, we've actually had quite a few, so I apologize if I can't get through all of these considering our time restriction here. However, one of the most recent questions that came in was, does the Alliance have resources we can share with business leaders locally?
We do, and it's much along the lines of what we have here. We're about to go through a marketing, again, kind of in a startup phase. But the short answer to that question is yes, and I guess we'll facilitate it through maybe you, Mary, and Christy, and I'll have Tori do that, but we'd be happy to. And a lot of it is exactly this presentation. I also noticed on the questions that there are some questions around, can we get this presentation? And the answer is absolutely, so we'll make sure that that gets sent as well. And you know, just a few of those stats really raise eyebrows, as I think someone mentioned earlier, when people start to understand even just the sheer volume of people that exist in India and China, and what that means in terms of their literacy and their contribution to the global productivity. So the short answer, yes. The long answer is thank you, and we'll make sure we get some of those materials, in particular this presentation, to folks.
Great, thank you, Neal. We also have a question from some of our local partners about accessing members from the Alliance for Childhood Education as guest speakers in their communities. Is that something that you guys do, Neal?
We do, yeah. So I think I first came across this group or this organization that we're speaking to now in Topeka by giving comments. Right now there's a lot of wrangling that's happening on the Missouri side, and so with the Commissioner of Education on the Missouri side, as well as many of the board members, there's a lot of active road trips that are happening there, I suppose. And the short answer there is yes. I think the only real way we're going to galvanize the entire state, the western portion of the state, Sedgwick County, Topeka, Lawrence, and Johnson County, as well as the great first district that I used to live in for a long time, is by actually working in those communities and working with other business leaders in those communities and making sure that there's a uniform voice. So the short answer to that question is also yes. And I hate to keep punting to Tori, but Tori is our executive director, and she is the one responsible for kind of coordinating all of that. But I think on our last slide, the ACE Invests is our website, and Tori can be contacted through that. But the short answer there is yes.
Great, thanks, Neal. I think, unfortunately, we're coming up on the end of our time. Christy and Ray, can I defer to you on that as the timekeeper, Ray?
Yes. We are just a little bit over time because we do have state agency leadership on the call who are going to be providing updates. And we really hate to cut this discussion short because Neal has shared a lot of good information with us, and obviously there is a lot of interest in continuing this conversation. So Neal, look for additional contacts and questions from people who are on the call, and we'd just like to thank you very much for spending time with us this morning, and we look forward to learning a lot more from you in the future. Thank you.
On behalf of all of the Alliance, I want to thank you as well. Really appreciate, obviously, the interest and the priority that is being placed on early childhood education. So thank you all for the opportunity as well.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. All right. At this time, then, I think we will we'll begin our state updates, and I have a list here. And we're going to hear from several of our partners. And my list indicates we're going to start with Child Care Aware of Kansas. and I would like to check to see if Chris Nicholson is on the phone with us this morning.
I am, Ray.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you please let us know what's happening at Child Care Aware?
Okay. Well, specifically, I'm going to update you on what's happening in regards to the military child care liaison. I am now in that position as of January 1st. And we did hold a 12-hour PCAN training in February that is preventing child abuse and neglect. 19 of our CCR and our staff, child care resource and referral staff, and 3 extension educators attended that training. And this training provided them with 60, they will have a curriculum that can then give training to 60 hours, have 60 hours of child care provider training. And this training was offered through a collaboration with our agency and CITAP, which is the Child Care and Youth Training and Technical Assistance Project. And the CITAP is comprised of a partnership between Department of Defense, Penn State, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and the USDA. Excuse me. So we'll have those trainers out and giving that PCAN training across the state. Well, I'm currently working on an updated version of our MCCL strategic plan, which is to be submitted to the department. Actually, we submitted to Child Care Aware of America next week and then on to the Department of Defense. And a couple of the goals that we're going to be looking at for the upcoming year in regards to collaborating with stakeholders will involve promoting and supporting collaboration among state and local stakeholders, and this will be done by emailing and reports to stakeholder groups about the unique needs of military children in off-installation child care. That's what the focus is making sure that statewide children that are not on posts or base off installation are receiving quality child care. We're also looking at facilitating partnerships and awareness to increase capacity of licensed care for non-traditional hours and weekend care. And that is definitely a high need for Guard and Reserve families, as of course those responsibilities typically take place on the weekend. So I've started work with GIFSAP, and right now I can't remember what that is. There's so many military terms I'm becoming aware of, or trying to, but I've been had a conversation with them, and I'll be hopefully working closely with the family readiness support staff to make sure to gather information and data in regards to what those military family needs are. So I am new to this position, so if any of you out there have comments or input or any assistance in regards to working with military families, I would certainly welcome that.
Okay, thank you very
that's what I have today, Ray.
Thank you, Chris. And we're not going to have time for questions on this morning's call, but we do have the contact information for each one of our state representatives, and so you may contact them directly with your questions or comments. Jane Weiler from the Children's Cabinet. Jane? I think I saw her name on the list earlier. Jane, are you available?
She's there. We're getting her connected, Ray.
Okay. I hope you're all thinking, while we're waiting for Jane, I hope you're all thinking about our guest speaker this morning. I've been thinking about how we might use his information and actually enlist assistance from some of his board members at the community level. This is a prime time to get their resources to some of our business community.
This is Christy and Jane. It should have sent you an audio pin. It's not unmuting you, so if you could just enter that, you should be able to get access.
Can we go ahead with Karen or Carrie maybe, while Jane is working on her audio.
It looks like Karen might be having the same issue, so I apologize for that. I'm not sure.
Let's go ahead maybe with Sabra, because we know Sabra was joining with Doug. So Sabra, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's go ahead. Sabra, would you like to provide us with updates from the Department of Health and Environment?
Yes. For the Part C Infant Toddler Program, the Infant Toddler Services has asked the Shawnee County ICC to convene a task force to look forward or to look at the funding formula this summer. And it is our hope that they will help us examine the current funding formula and see if there is a more equitable way of funding local programs. Currently, a local program may not receive the same amount of funding from year to year, so it's hard to plan. Quite a few have received cuts because other programs have grown at a faster rate. The underlying problem is the funding has stagnated since 2008, and the number of children served has increased by 38% in that time. Also, the Kansas Infant Toddler Services has just wrapped up a public comment period for the new procedure manual that matches the federal regulations for Part C. And we are finalizing that document, and it should be posted on our website in the near future. And for maternal child health, the new MCH grant will be due July 1st. And so we have a new survey that we're encouraging everyone to take a look at and give their input on how they see MCH funding should be spent and what the programs should look like. And so we would encourage you, you will probably receive an invitation to do so and look at that Survey Monkey. And in an attachment, you'll see the Survey Monkey information. So take a look at that. And so I'll let Lori Steelman go ahead now,
Okay,
if you want. Okay.
Good morning. For child care licensing, I just have two quick updates. We're very excited that the customer provider portal that is a shared combo application system with DCF had a soft launch in February, and we are happy to say that our April applicants, we had over 128 of them that applied online. So we're encouraged with the steady increase of the portal usage, and of course the portal allows applicants or current licensees to apply for an initial app, renew their application online, apply to become a DCF provider through that combo app, or update the affiliates working or residing or volunteering within their facility. So we're excited. We're moving forward with technology there. It's awesome. We're also excited about the Kansas initiative that is the Kansas Licensing Indicator System, which is a type of inspection, and we hate to say shortened inspection because it doesn't lessen the inspection, but what this inspection does is allows for compliant facilities to have a survey that is a reduced survey, and gives that the time that the surveyors would have spent with a facility that is always compliant. It gives them additional time to spend with facilities that need technical assistance and struggle with compliance. And of course, those facilities would never get a licensing indicator survey because they're not compliant. But we had two stakeholder meetings regarding the indicator system. One was held in Topeka on April 9th. The other was in Wichita on the 11th of April. And Ron Milewski, Director of Pennsylvania Bureau of Health Systems Service Licensing, and he's also the president-elect of the NARA, came and presented the indicators and took our questions. We talked about the criteria, and NARA consultants are working with us in developing the policy and being able to provide technical assistance and training to staff, to the health departments that contract with us to do those surveys. So at this point, we still are on target for our expected pilot date, which is September of this year. So those are the two updates that I have for CCL.
Hey, great. Thank you very much. A lot of exciting technology things happening.
Yes.
So, Christy, I'm going to touch base and see. I don't see Jane or Karen on our attendee list right now. Are they trying to call back in?
No, I actually moved them over, and Karen should be on now.
Okay. Karen, are you there?
Yes, Ray, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Welcome back.
Thank you. I don't think it's the technology, but maybe the technology user.
Oh, well, you know, that's okay. We all understand. We've all been there and done that. So go ahead.
All right. I just had a quick announcement. I wanted people to be aware that the Child Care Development Fund, or the CCDF state plan that we submit every other year, the 2014-2015 state plan draft is actually posted on our website, and that we are also have scheduled our public hearing for the state plan. If you go to our public website for Department for Children and Families at www.dcf.ks.gov, and if you click on child care or go to the news items, it will have the information about where you can access the plan and actually where you can register for the public hearing. We have scheduled the public hearing for Friday, June 7th from 10 a.m. to 12 noon out at the Learning Center in Topeka. So if you want to come face-to-face or want to come in person. But we also are trying something different and doing a live meeting. So you can register through the DCF website to participate from anywhere in the state in that manner. So I look forward to input either through a public hearing, through an email. That's also available if you want to submit input by email. That information is on our website also. And then I'm going to just turn it over to Kim Kennedy with the Head Start Collaboration Office.
Hello, this is Kim. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Kim. Thank you.
All right. Well, I just wanted to give a brief update on the early learning standards revisions work. Right now, we are in the final stages of completing edits for the science and social studies standards, and we're hoping for the end of an end-of-the-month rollout of the complete standards revisions work that will be posted on the KSDE website. So stay tuned, and that's all I have for that.
Hey, okay. Thank you very much. From the Department for Children and Families, have we been able to get Jane on the phone?
We have not. We are still working on it, so I would be happy to go ahead and give a quick project launch update.
That would be great.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have been hosting a series of webinars for National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day this week, and we've had over 400 attendees and a variety of topics, and then our last webinar tomorrow focuses on court teams for infants and toddlers, and this is an area where there is a lot of interest around the state and in some specific communities in creating a differential response when infants and toddlers are involved, just having the court consider attachment and relationship issues. And so if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to participate in the webinar tomorrow at 10 and then to contact me and I can get you connected if you would like to work on that issue. We've also been working really closely with the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics to provide several trainings on developmental screening and maternal depression and screening for maternal depression in communities across the state, most recently Abilene and Beloit. And so we will be looking for communities that are interested in having training in the coming launch year, which will begin October 1st of 2013. So if you're interested in having training provided free of charge in your community focused on developmental screening or maternal depression, just please send me an email, and my email is on the screen. I did also want to mention that we're partnering with the Kansas Alliance for Drug Endangered Children to host a conference, which is June 26th. It will be in Overland Park at the KU Edwards campus, and we have Bruce Perry as our keynote speaker, and he's also doing afternoon breakout sessions. So it's $60 for registration for the full day and some contact hours, and so I would encourage all of you to register for that as well. And then just finally, I wanted to mention that our partners in Finney County, which is our target community, have been really busy doing some great things, and most recently they've really focused on tying in domestic violence prevention efforts with early childhood, and so they're looking at providing some trainings and other education around domestic violence. And that's all I had, Ray, and it looks like we still don't have Jane.
Okay. Well, that's a lot, Christy. You've got a lot going on, and I noticed Jane was in the list, but her phone is not lit up, so she must not be able to join us yet. So I think we'll go ahead and invite Loretta to provide some feedback on the forum cafe, and if we can get Jane before the end of the call, we'll ask her to provide her update before we wrap up, if that's okay. So Loretta.
Hi, Ray. That sounds like a great plan. Mary is working to get Jane on the phone, so I will keep this brief so that if she joins us, she'll have time to speak. Okay. Those of you who participated in our forum in January, you may remember that we spent quite a lot of time doing a cafe-style discussion about the forums to get your feedback and opinions on the virtual forum as well as just the forums in general. And so what I'm going to share with you just briefly is kind of the compiled feedback from that discussion. But we will also post on our website the entirety of all of that feedback we got that day. Excuse me. Clearly it's too long to share today, so we just have kind of the overview of what folks had to say. So to get started, one of the first questions we asked was, what draws you to the forum? The key notes we got here were networking. Folks really felt like the in-person forums offered collaboration opportunities, an opportunity to promote their programs, and then also a time when their new staff could get introduced to the early childhood system and that they could get reacquainted with others. Also, information sharing was identified. Folks really appeared to like the legislative update, the opportunities to learn what's happening in the state, including new initiatives and new things that might be happening. And then one of the final areas that really draws folks to the forum are resources. That may be money, people, technical assistance, but the opportunity to hear about those resources is definitely a draw. So a trickier question is asking our system here in Kansas the value they see in the virtual forums. And obviously cost and time savings were identified. It's easy to see that not having to travel makes it much more cost and time effective for everyone. It's more convenient to participate in the virtual forums. These forums are archived for those who can't be on the call at the time that it happens. And the technology. Some people really appeared to appreciate the opportunity to really utilize technology to enhance our efforts. Also, members of the system identified collaboration as a value for the virtual forum. One reason for this is that it allows staff who couldn't travel to a in-person forum to participate. So greater collaboration both within agencies and then also local partners who can participate in the virtual calls. Interestingly, these are the exact same areas that were identified as deficiencies in the virtual forum. Even though convenience was definitely a benefit of the virtual forum, folks also felt that it provided a lot of distractions when they're in their office, that they're tempted to multitask. They may get calls and emails and people walking in, so it's difficult to really be engaged in the virtual forum. Not surprisingly, technology was identified as a deficiency. It is a challenge sometimes for us all to utilize the technology. The audio can be difficult for people to access. And then the collaboration aspect is really identified as missing, excuse me, from the virtual forum because there's just not that opportunity for personal interaction and networking. We also asked that if professional development isn't offered during the virtual forum, what's the most beneficial use of that time? And as you can see, the results of that discussion were that individuals like to see updates, they like to see hot topics, and then also opportunities to really promote collaboration. Moving away from just those forum-specific questions, we also asked about the most pressing issues facing early childhood system development in our state. And I don't think you'll be surprised at all to see that funding was the primary response we received. Individuals identified flexible, consistent, reliable, and adequate funding, state and federal funding barriers, and then also a lack of clear priorities allowing agencies to plan for funding. Systems issues were also identified. Individuals who participated in the cafe felt that there were multiple parallel systems without alignment, and again mentioned a lack of a unified vision for early childhood in Kansas. Issues of alignment and coordination was a common theme. People who participated in the cafes mentioned that silos need to be broken down and we need to find a way to communicate to policymakers and funders about our priorities. Other pressing issues you'll see here on the screen are identifying research and evidence-based practices and ways to provide professional development and credentialing. Other than funding, what are the greatest challenges to the work that you do in your community? You'll see a varied list here. I won't go through them in detail since we're running short on time. But what we mostly want to communicate to you, excuse me, after you participated in the cafe in January is that we heard this message that we received from you, that we've compiled this information, we've gone through it as a system, and we are thinking about ways that we can address the issues that have been raised. As you'll see on the schedule of upcoming forums that Ray will share with you shortly, we have reduced the number of virtual forums for 2013 and 2014. We will only have a virtual forum in January of 2014. That was a request made by this group that if we're going to have virtual forums, we should have them in the winter months when it can possibly prevent folks from traveling in dangerous conditions. And in the July forum, we're really going to focus on showcasing different programs and innovative activities that are taking on in the state. So again, we really want to thank you for all the feedback we received. As I mentioned, we will post all of the feedback that has been compiled on our website, and we hope that we can begin to see some of the information you shared with us reflected in future forums. So Ray, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much, Loretta. And as you can see, the cafe was a very worthwhile exercise. I think we learned a lot, and it will be very helpful as we move forward in planning future forums and as we sort of adjust our approach to planning the forums. On the screen, you'll see the schedule and the dates and locations for the future forums. I want to check real quickly. I don't see Jane's, I see her name, but not her phone lit up on the screen, so I'm assuming we weren't able to get her on the call.
Oh, Ray, this is Mary. We've tried to get Jane on the call. We've done quite a bit of troubleshooting, but unfortunately, we weren't able to get her connected, so we apologize for that.
So I think what we'll do is we'll ask Jane if she could just provide her report in writing and just maybe ask her to share that with Mary, and then we can post it to the website along with Gail's report from the Department of Education so that everybody will have the benefit of that information. So, okay, so as you can see, our next forum will be in July on the 22nd in Wichita. And I believe that's a Monday, so that's, it seems like our forums are typically on a Thursday, so that's maybe a little bit different. So you want to make sure you note that. And then October 24th, again, will be a forum in Topeka. And as Loretta mentioned, the January forum will be a virtual forum. And someone was brilliant to suggest that we not travel during the winter months. And then our final forum will be April 24th, and we'll be back in Salina. And we haven't determined the exact locations for those. Those will be coming at a later date. So I think at this time, then we will, we're ready to wrap up. Mary and Christy, do we have, or Loretta, do we have any other information or anything else that you all needed to share before we close up?
This is Christy, and I just wanted to share a couple of things. As I mentioned, this is the information for the court team webinar tomorrow, so I would encourage you to participate, and you can register by going to keccs.org if you haven't already done that. And then you will receive a SurveyMonkey, probably not directly after this, but we will be sending out a survey via SurveyMonkey to get your feedback about the presentation and the forum as a whole. And if you would like a certificate of attendance, you can get one by sending an email to me, and we'll make sure you get one. Additionally, there will be a recorded version of this webinar and handouts available at keccs.org. Give us about a week to get those uploaded online. And if you have any questions, feel free to give me an email. And that's all we have, Ray.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining the forum this morning, and have a great day.